Lena Foster arrives at Metro Health, looking like an ordinary nurse. But the Second Sergeant Jack Harris is rushed through those doors. Something in her shifts. She spots the fatal mistake seasoned doctors miss, saves his life under pressure, and accidentally exposes a conspiracy inside his own chain of command. What begins as emergency medicine quickly becomes a military thriller about betrayal, surveillance, and a soldier who knows too much to survive quietly.
The clipboard clattered on the metal tray. Reynolds pointed at Lena. "Get her out," he commanded. "No new nurse is touching my patient." His voice cut like a blade. The room was still. His pulse was gone, his blood pressure nil, and every monitor screamed the fatal truth. The team had done everything. They were seconds from calling it, losing a soldier who survived a war only to die here. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe for the conclusion. Add your city in a comment so I can track how far this tale travels. When Lena Foster entered Metro Health Military Hospital, she kept her eyes forward. She paid no mind to the decor or the photos of heroes on the walls. She adjusted her bag, checked her watch, 6:54 a.m., 6 minutes to spare, and found the ground floor desk. A new job was not her greatest fear. A younger nurse named Priya looked up, her expression changing at Lena's height, before she smiled shyly. "You're the new hire, Lena? That's me." Priya nudged a lanyard toward her. "Welcome. Dr. Reynolds is running trauma, and he is already livid." "What kind of livid?" Priya lowered her voice, leaning in. "The kind that made a resident sob before 8 a.m. last Tuesday. Keep your head down and don't be a hero. That is how you survive." Lena took the lanyard and clipped it on. The emergency room at Metro Health was a place without peace. It served bases, military families, and veterans from 3 counties. It saw injuries most hospitals never did, from combat wounds to severe PTSD. The chaos was just part of the job. Lena moved through the morning with precision. She took vitals, charted, and answered every query with calm authority. A senior nurse, Marcus, observed her for 20 minutes before walking over. "This is not your first time," he said. It was a statement. "My first time with what?" Lena asked, her eyes on an IV line. "This world. You carry yourself like a seasoned trauma nurse." "I had good training," she replied. Marcus paused, then nodded and left without another word. There was something about Lena Foster that discouraged questions. By noon they had seen 14 patients, minor fractures, 1 burn case, and 2 concussions. A routine day. Then the radio crackled. Lena was at the nurse's station when the call broke. She processed it first. Military transport inbound, multiple traumas, convoy hit, ETA 11 minutes. She put down her chart and headed for the trauma bay. Marcus stopped her. "New nurses are kept out of trauma for their first week. It is policy. I know the policy. Then you will stay here and assist with triage." She met his gaze. Understood. She stayed, but her eyes were locked on the entrance. The ambulance screamed in after 9 minutes. The ER became a controlled hurricane. Doctors ran, nurses called out blood types, and residents managed the flood. 6 patients arrived, 4 were serious, 2 critical. Lena directed the intake flow with silent efficiency. She saw everything. The soldier in Bay 2 hiding his agony behind a stoic facade. The medic whose unfocused eyes signaled a head injury no one had caught. She reported both observations unprompted. A gurney rolled in with the 3rd wave. She heard the desperation in the medics' voices. "He conded twice out there. We revived him both times, but his pressure has been crashing for 20 minutes. Gunshot to the chest. Pneumothorax, heavy blood loss." A young medic in stained gloves spoke to the nearest doctor. "He is a SEAL, Special Warfare, Sergeant Jack Harris." The trauma team swarmed him. Dr. Reynolds was already there, his authority absolute. honed by 30 years of saving lives. He gave orders, he pointed, he never asked. Lena found herself drawn to the edge of the trauma bay, a forbidden zone. Her station was 30 feet away, yet instinct pulled her forward. She watched the man on the gurney, her focus absolute. Jack Harris had a soldier's build, broad shoulders and a strong jaw, even unconscious. His skin was the wrong color, his breathing was shallow, a mechanical pattern she knew instantly. The chest dressing was failing. She saw the slight turn of his neck, the deviation of his trachea. A tension pneumothorax was building, killing him faster than the bleed. "Pressure is dropping," someone yelled. 70/40. "Push another unit of O-neg," Reynolds commanded. "Chest X-ray?" 2 minutes. "We do not have 2 minutes. Get me the ultrasound." Lena edged into the room, then froze. She saw the probe glide across Jack's chest. She saw Reynolds's sharp, angry exhale. She saw the resident staring at the monitor, lost. And she saw the monitor trace its fatal decline. "He is not perfusing," Reynolds said. "His heart is failing. Should we crack his chest?" the resident asked. "Not yet." The alarm's pitch sharpened. "He is going into V-fib." What happened next was orderly mayhem. Paddles charged. Clear. One shock, then a second. The flat line wavered, a weak, unsteady rhythm. It was a reprieve, not a rescue. Again, Reynolds ordered, his voice strained. Everyone in the bay was an expert at their job. Lena saw their skill, and she saw what they were missing. The two realities clashed within her. Pressure is 60/30. He is going to code again. Reynolds fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was hollow with defeat. "Prep a crash cart, call cardiothoracic, and get the chaplain." The word hung in the air like a final judgment. An absolute quiet followed. Lena stepped into the doorway. She saw Jack Harris, his chest rising and falling in that wrong, shallow way. She saw his limp hands and the monitor counting down his life. And she felt something she had not felt in years. Not fear, but a cold, clear certainty. It was a profound conviction. "He is not gone," she said. The quiet words cut through the silence. 3 people turned, including Reynolds. He stared, his face a mask. "Who are you?" "Lena Foster. I am a nurse here. And you are not allowed in this bay. Get out." "With all due respect, his trachea has deviated. You are missing the tension pneumothorax." I said, "Get out." His voice was a command. "Now. Remove her from my trauma bay. I will not have a new nurse near him." Nobody moved. It was not defiance. The steely calm in her voice had frozen them in a way his anger could not. Reynolds stepped toward her. That was not a suggestion. "Get out of here now, or I will have security escort you out. Do you understand?" Lena's eyes moved from him to Jack, then back. "His trachea is displaced. He has a left-sided tension pneumothorax. In 90 seconds his heart will stop, and he will not come back." Her voice was unwavering. "So you can eject me, or you can check his chest. You do not have time to do both." A heavy silence filled the room. Reynolds just stared. The resident beside him watched, stunned. Marcus, now in the doorway, was a statue. A new, frantic alarm broke the quiet. "Pressure is at 50, the nurse said, her voice shaking. Reynolds stood frozen for a beat, then snatched a needle kit and thrust it at Lena. "If this goes wrong," he whispered, "you are finished." She took it and moved to Jack's left side, her hands perfectly steady. They had always been steady. She found the point by feel, aimed and pushed. The hiss of escaping air was unmistakable. On the monitor, the pressure reading began to rise, slowly at first, then with conviction. 60, 70, 75. No one breathed. Lena stepped back, placing the kit on the tray. Jack's breathing, though labored, lost its mechanical rhythm, finding a natural cadence. The deathly cast of his skin began to fade. He was still critical, bleeding, his life hanging in the balance. But they had pulled him back from the edge. "Foster," Reynolds said, her name a stark sound in the room. She met his eyes. He hesitated. "Stay." And she did. For the next 40 minutes she integrated with the trauma team, displaying a skill no one could have anticipated. She never took over or challenged Reynolds, but when she saw a problem, she spoke. Every time. She was right. Correcting a vasopressor dose, suggesting a new position to aid blood flow. She even redressed a chest wound a medic had applied at an unsafe angle. The resident, Dr. Cho, observed her with awed respect. "Where did you pick that up?" he asked during a lull. "Field work," Lena said flatly. "What kind of field?" She offered no reply. 42 minutes in, Jack Harris was stable. Not well, he would need surgery, careful watching, and luck. But he was holding. His heart settled into a solid beat. His pressure held, and colour returned to his face like a slow sunrise. Reynolds backed away from the bed. He peeled off his gloves, his gaze moving from the patient to the woman opposite him. His usually impassive expression had cracked. What showed through was something other than anger. "Clear the room," he ordered. The staff left in hushed groups, the adrenaline draining away into weariness. Marcus went with them, but hesitated at the door, casting one final glance at Lena. Once they were alone, Reynolds strode towards her, stopping 2 feet away. They were almost the same height. "Your file indicates a nursing degree from Jefferson Health 18 months ago," he said. "Correct. It also says no prior medical experience." "That is also correct." His eyes bored into her. That decompression was straight out of a tactical combat care manual. They don't cover that in nursing school. The wound packing is a spec ops technique. I've only seen it used by JSOC operators. The silence stretched, broken only by the monitor's even beep. 2 hours earlier, no one believed Jack Harris would still be alive. Lena met Reynolds' stare, then looked at Jack. "He'll need a surgeon within 4 hours." "That packing won't stop the subclavian bleed forever," she went on, "and we need to monitor his lung for fluid. Check for breath sounds every 30 minutes. Reynolds didn't press his question. "I'll page thoracic," he said, turning to the door and pausing. He spoke without turning back. "That was a good catch on the pneumothorax, Foster." It wasn't an apology, but from Reynolds it was a profound admission. Lena moved a chair to Jack's bedside. She sat, watching his face pale, bruised, but breathing. He was, against all odds, still breathing. His hands lay loose on the sterile sheet. The right one had a familiar scar, a thin white line from a very specific incident in a very specific place. Her face betrayed nothing. She sat with her hands folded, observing the unwavering pulse of his heart on the display. Beyond the bay, the ER was returning to its usual frenetic pace. But in here, there was only the low drone of equipment, the man on the bed, and the woman at his side. Her hand unconsciously drifted to the breast pocket of her scrubs, finding it empty. No surprise there. She hadn't carried those things for years, but her fingers lingered, an echo of a former habit. Jack's state held steady. He was alive with a stubborn resolve, his body refusing its fate. Lena remained silent. After 15 minutes, Dr. Cho reappeared. He was in his mid-20s, his face still open before the job had hardened him. He held a tablet, unable to hide his burning curiosity. "Thoracic is en route. ETA 40 minutes, he reported. "Good," she answered. Cho lingered, his eyes shifting between the patient and her. "Can I ask you something?" he finally asked. "You can. When Reynolds told you to get out." "You didn't." "Why?" He posed the question like a puzzle he couldn't solve. Anyone else would have been gone. Lena paused for a moment. Most people, she said, looking at Jack, didn't see what was right in front of them. Which was what? A man refusing to die? Cho processed this, nodding slowly as he tucked the idea away and then left her alone. Lena went back to watching the patient. She noted the scar, the posture of his shoulders, the small signals unreadable to the untrained eye. Leaning forward, she rested her forearms on her knees and uttered a word, a whisper that was barely air. It was a sound intended for him alone. Falcon. The single word was a name from another life, a call to arms. On the screen, the steady line of his heartbeat jumped just a tiny fraction, but it was there. The monitor's trace gained a new vitality, a spark of recognition, as if a deep part of him heard and answered. Lena leaned away, silent. She folded her hands again and waited, while Sergeant Jack Harris fought to breathe. The word hung in the air for 3 seconds before the machine responded. It wasn't a sudden awakening or a cinematic miracle. It was a subtle, resolute change in the rhythm. The line pulsed with slightly more purpose, the beeps now spaced with greater strength, like a man in a deep coma turning toward a sound he knew. Lena saw. And she did not speak. She settled back, hands clasped, her face an impassive mask. She'd learned years ago that in a fight your expression was a liability. She had been waiting for 6 minutes when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in, just propped himself in the opening with his arms crossed, watching her watch the patient. He looked like someone re-evaluating everything he thought he knew. "Reynolds wants a debrief in 20, he said. "I'll be there," Lena said. Marcus didn't move, his eyes going from the monitor to her. "How did you spot it?" he asked. "The pneumo." His trachea looked centered to me. "It was off by 3 millimeters, she replied. "You have to know where to look." "And you did." She looked him straight in the eye. "Yes." He uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again, a clear conflict raging in his eyes. "Where did you do your trauma rotation?" "Your file," says Jefferson. But they don't teach nurses to do a needle decompression in under 45 seconds with a surgeon's precision. Lena held his gaze. "It wasn't a standard rotation." "Unconventional?" Marcus repeated, as if the word tasted strange. "I'll be at the debrief in 20 minutes, she stated again. He held her stare for a second, like someone who has hit a wall and is deciding whether to break it down. He backed off. His footsteps faded down the hall. 41 minutes after Lena whispered a single word over his body, Jack Harris's eyes moved. They didn't open, just a flutter beneath his eyelids, a weak muscle spasm of a man fighting his way back from the brink. His right hand, marked with its burn scar, flickered against the sheet. The fingers clenched and unclenched, as if reaching for something. Lena leaned closer. "Harris?" she said, her voice quiet but firm, with no room for error. "You are in a hospital. You are safe. Do not touch anything." His head moved. "Keep your head still," she ordered, her tone as steady and unyielding as rock. The hand on the bed went still. His pressure was 88/54 low, but a world away from disaster. His breathing was even. His oxygen saturation hit 91% and was still rising. His body was engaged in the grim, determined task of staying alive. Lena observed it all with what looked like professional detachment, but it was the exact opposite. She was rigid because the emotion was a flood. She had perfected that skill in places where showing feeling was a critical weakness. You buried it, locked it down under incredible pressure. You kept your voice steady and your hands sure. You did the work. Later, in private, you might let it out in some small, controlled way. She had hoped that part of her life was over, not in a Virginia hospital on a Tuesday. She had learned that life rarely cares about your plans. Dr. Cho came back at the 20-minute mark with a thoracic surgeon. Dr. Park was a compact woman in her late 40s who moved with the crisp economy of a person who never wasted a second. Park took the tablet from Cho, eyed the patient, then Lena, and then Cho again. "She's the one who placed the needle?" Park asked. "Yes," Cho said. Park's second look at Lena was different. It wasn't hierarchical. It was the look of a peer, a sign of respect. "Good call," she said. Another few minutes and that tension would have shifted his entire chest cavity. This conversation would be far more morbid. "I'm aware," Lena replied. A small smile touched Park's lips. "We are taking him to OR2 for a subclavian repair, maybe a full thoracotomy. His pressure needs to be stable for transport." She glanced at the monitor. "Think he'll make it?" "Move him in the next 15 minutes," Lena answered, "and his body's defenses will peak and then fail. He needs surgery before his pressure bottoms out." Park studied her. "You have an unusual certainty for a non-physician." "About this, I do," Lena stated. Park faced Cho. "Get OR2 on the line. We're inbound." Then, glancing back at Lena, she added, "Care to join?" The offer hung between them. Cho's gaze shot upwards. Lena's expression was a stone mask, but a brief, controlled flicker of hunger showed in her eyes before vanishing. "I'm not certified for that role," she said. "I've seen your file," Park replied flatly. "I'm not asking what you can do, but what you want to do." The silence held for precisely 2 seconds before Lena stood. "Point me to the sinks." The debrief Reynolds demanded never occurred as planned. Just as they wheeled Jack Harris to OR2, the ER was swamped by a rollover accident and a soldier with chest pains pulling Reynolds back to the floor. Lena quickly learned this was the pulse of Metro Health. Calm was an illusion. The hospital was an organism. The second you took a breath, it inhaled all the quiet around you. In surgery, she stood just outside the sterile zone, following Park's orders, clamps, suction, holding pressure. She recited Jack's vitals with an effortless command that made the tech glance over twice in 15 minutes. "You've done this before," he observed, stating the obvious. "In the field," Lena replied under her breath. He wondered if it was military. She offered no answer. The tech, a kind-eyed man in his 30s, nodded once and went back to his instruments. Park moved with the precision of a master artisan, finding and mending the subclavian tear before tackling a second bleeder. She lingered over the pleural space, her concentration total. "There's old damage here," she noted. "Adhesions from a major past trauma." She examined the tissue. "He survived an untreated hemothorax not long ago." Her gaze met Lena's over the operating table. "Are you familiar with his medical file?" Lena's eyes never left the surgical field. He's active duty special forces. "That file is sealed." "Right," Park said, continuing her work. "Well, whatever sealed event this was, someone patched him up with nothing. The scarring is a textbook example of battlefield medicine." She paused. Brilliant, really. Lena said nothing, but her hand tightened on a retractor for a split second. Jack Harris was moved from OR2 at 7:47 p.m., following 2 hours and 19 minutes on the table. He was breathing without assistance, a fact Park called a welcome surprise. His blood pressure held with a stubbornness the anesthesiologist, Dr. Oway, recorded in his notes. They took him to the surgical ICU on the 3rd floor. Lena followed the gurney to the elevator bay and stopped. She had been on the clock for 13 hours. Her shift was 2 hours done. She had no duties in the SICU. She had no official business on that elevator. She hit the call button. The SICU held 4 bays and 2 isolation rooms for critical cases. Jack was placed in private room 1, a space walled with glass and bristling with monitors like a tactical operations center. The charge nurse, Gloria, a woman with the unflappable air of a veteran, noted Lena's ID. Day shift, she said. A simple observation. I'm aware, Lena answered. You're the one who spotted the pneumo. I am. Gloria assessed her for a moment, then gestured to the room. He's agitated. Not conscious, but moving. He keeps grabbing for his IV line. We've had to restrain him twice. He's a fighter, Lena remarked. They usually are, Gloria said. It's not always enough. She returned to her station. You can stay with him. Just don't touch a single thing without my say-so. Lena went inside. Immobilized and tethered to a dozen wires, Jack Harris was transformed. Not a man in danger, but a figure caught between life and the void. His skin tone was better. The grey pallor had faded. His own breathing marked a steady rhythm, replacing the machine's artificial beat. She watched him from a chair, her hand instinctively moving toward a vacant pocket. She caught the motion, pressing her hand to her sternum. "Always a damn stubborn mule," she murmured. On the bed, his bandaged hand twitched, fingers grasping for something not there. She placed her hand over his, a point of contact, not a caress. He was too far under to notice, yet the searching stopped. The monitor's steady pulse became a ceasefire. Gloria broke the silence from behind the glass, her look apologetic but firm. A single tap of her knuckle. "Dr. Reynolds." Lena withdrew her hand, checked the monitors by instinct, and walked to the door. Reynolds was waiting in the hall, still in his surgical scrubs, looking like a commander just back from a long engagement. The day's fight had etched a bone-deep weariness into his face. "A word," he said, as she stepped out. They walked past the busy nurses' station, toward the quiet end of the corridor. He stopped at a window, turning to face her. He slid his hands into his pockets. "I reviewed your personnel jacket," she expected as much. "It's perfect," he stated. "Top marks, excellent rotations, a year in a civilian clinic. No unexplained gaps. A flawless record," she confirmed. "But that record says nothing about performing a 45-second needle decompression," he shot back. "Or the surgical instincts, Parks said, were the sharpest she's seen from a non-resident in 5 years. "This isn't an official inquiry," Reynolds continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "This conversation is not happening. It won't appear in any report. I just have one question." She stayed silent. "The man in that room," he motioned with his head, "Jack Harris, is he your asset?" The ambient hospital noise seemed to disappear. Her response was exact and measured. "In no capacity that interferes with my responsibilities here." He stared at her, his expression unreadable, before giving a curt nod. "Get some sleep, Foster. Your shift starts at 7. Lena lingered by the window. The cold pain felt real. In the parking area below, a military truck was parked under the sodium lamps, a shadow from her past. She let her hand fall. She went back to the SICU. Gloria's raised eyebrow was all the question needed. "Soon," Lena said. The senior nurse looked toward the patient, her professional demeanor softening with a hint of empathy. She'd held this watch for 11 years, witnessing every kind of bedside vigil. She silently handed Lena a cup of coffee. Lena accepted it and resumed her post, the equipment beeping out the seconds. At 9:47, a time she mentally recorded to maintain discipline, Harris uttered a sound. Not just air, but the rough draft of a word, a dispatch from the abyss. She was instantly at his side, leaning in. "Harris." His eyelids fluttered, struggling to rise from a deep, submerged place. "Harris," she said again, her tone a grounding force. "You are at Metro Health. You are post-surgery." His mouth opened. A harsh, ragged noise escaped. Not quite a word. But she understood. She understood it perfectly. Shadow. It wasn't her name. It was a call sign. A designation buried deep in government servers miles away. A word she hadn't heard in 2.5 years. A sudden tightness seized her throat, a weakness she crushed in an instant. She moved closer, speaking for him alone. "I'm here. You're safe. Stand down, soldier." His hand twitched again. She grasped it. His fingers wrapped around hers. Gloria was at the window, and Lena gave a sharp, one-handed sign. "We need privacy." Gloria went still. The hold was weak but conscious, not an involuntary spasm. He was coming up, breaking the surface, gasping for reality. His eyelids made one final, determined effort, and they opened. His eyes were the colour of a churning sea, hazy with medication and the confusion of being torn from one world to another. They roamed the room before fixing on her. The fog in his stare persisted, but something else pierced through it, something older than confusion, clearer than recognition. "You're supposed to be dead," he rasped, his voice shredded. "I'm aware," she replied. "You're here," he said, needing the confirmation. "I'm here." He closed his eyes, not succumbing to darkness, but finding a hard-won peace. His hand remained in hers. Gloria came in, her professional routine carried out with a quiet deference. She departed, pulling the door shut with a care that spoke volumes. Lena sat with him for 40 more minutes, until his numbers were stable, until his grasp slackened into real sleep, until the operator inside her knew he had passed the crisis point. Only then did she rise. With a firm pull she straightened her uniform, gave his face one last assessment, and left the room. At the elevators she called the car. It arrived silently. She stepped in, and as the doors closed she finally let out a single, controlled exhale that felt heavier than lead. As the car went down, Sergeant Jack Harris stayed in the SICU, breathing, resting, alive. She managed 4 hours and 40 minutes of sleep. Not nearly enough, but all her conditioning would permit before the inner alarm jolted her awake at 5:17 a.m., a familiar shock from a decade of alerts. Waking was a hard cut, not a gentle fade. For a precise half-minute she lay still in the borrowed room. A marker called in from Marcus. She mapped the hospital's 5 a.m. soundscape, the electrical drone, the whisper of wheels, and the random pop of a speaker. The sounds were predictable, not peaceful, and she functioned well inside known systems. Then she moved. Water on her face, scrubs back on. She took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Gloria was at her desk. The SICU had made it through the night intact. The stairwell door snicked shut. Gloria looked up, noted Lena's presence, and returned to her screen without comment. Her coffee was fresh. The woman was a fortress of professional composure, an attribute Lena respected but could not emulate. Room 1. Lena stopped at the glass. Jack was awake, though immobile. He didn't have the strength for it, and the chest tubes made it impossible. But his eyes were open, tracking. His right hand rested on his sternum, a deliberate placement. His head was turned toward the entrance. He was waiting. "Still here," he said, his voice a low gravel, stronger than it was at 21:47. Rest and hydration were working their slow, brutal magic. "I was off shift," she said. "But you returned. My tour begins at 0700. She approached the bedside chair, her gaze sweeping the monitor by reflex. Blood pressure was 94/61, heart rate 68. An improvement. Not good, but better, the only vector that mattered. He watched her check the numbers. A faint smile pulled at his lips. Still at it. At what? Threat assessment before contact. She sat down, her eyes locking with his. Pain level? Tolerable. "Which means it's high," she replied. He glanced at the ceiling. "It's high," he conceded. "I've had worse." "I'm aware," she said. The shared history was a weight in the air between them. He looked back at her, his face holding the brutal honesty of someone 12 hours past his own death. He was never a gentle man, but the usual armour, the quick humour, the careful distance had been carved away, leaving only the raw machinery of a body trying to reboot. "How long have you been posted here?" he asked. "Metro Health." "Yesterday was my first day," she answered. His eyes shifted not with shock, but the fast reassessment of a field map suddenly altered. "Day one," he repeated. "Correct. And they put you in the ER. Standard assignment for new personnel." He studied her, his stare absolute. "And I was the package." "You were the package," she agreed. A moment of quiet. "Lena," he breathed, as if confirming her reality. "What are the odds?" "Astronomically low," she replied. "But not impossible, clearly." He breathed out, a careful negotiation with the pain. "You're not going to call this chance, are you?" "No," she stated. "I'm going to call it a non-factor. You're combat effective. That is the only relevant data point." His jaw tightened. She knew that expression. He was building a case, finding his angle. She held her ground and waited. "You used my call sign," he said finally, "down in the ER. Before they moved me." "I said your name," she corrected. "My sign," he insisted, his words sharp. "I heard it. It cut through the static." He waited a beat. "No one on this post knows that sign." "And no one here knows you ever carried one," he finished. She met his gaze. "Correct." He closed his eyes, not sleeping, but processing information independent of his broken body. His fingers flexed against his chest. "How long?" he rasped, his eyes shut. "Long since what?" "You got out. 30 months," she replied. He opened his eyes. "The program." "Yes, the program." A word never spoken aloud, it was the protocol for making assets vanish into smaller lives. A fresh start. Lena's own entry was handled by 3 people, none of them here. That Jack knew of it confirmed the access he still held. "They let you walk," he said. "I requested extraction," she countered. "A different thing entirely." "For what reason?" She looked at her hands, then at him. "Because I was good at the mission," she said, "and my effectiveness was creating something I could no longer be." The truth settled in the room. He didn't argue. He had seen too much to require an explanation, a trait she had always valued. He didn't need to feign understanding, he just knew. "Does anyone on this station know?" he asked. "No. Reynolds is suspicious. He's also smart enough to not ask questions. For now." "For now," Jack repeated. "For now," she confirmed. He was silent. "Then I have a situation to report." The sudden change in tone engaged a part of her training far removed from medicine. She did not move, but her entire posture became rigid. "The convoy," Jack said, his voice shifting from a patient's rasp to a briefer's monotone. "It wasn't a random ambush. Jack, you must." His right hand left his sternum and found the bed rail, a weak but determined grip. "It was an orchestrated hit," he said. 3 kill boxes across a 4-mile route. They had our path, our timing." He paused. "They had our Manning roster." A cold certainty began to form in Lena's gut. She kept her face a blank slate. "An intel compromise." "A confirmed compromise," he clarified. "High level. They knew the exact gap in our air support." His eyes were now locked on hers, sharp and desperate. "I lost 3 operators, Lena. The source knew the precise moment to hit us." "You submitted a report." "Filed what I could before being airlifted out," he said through gritted teeth. "But there is a complication." She waited. "An individual on my report's distribution chain," he said slowly, "is outside my chain of command. Someone who can bury this intel." Lena was silent. The monitor continued its steady, indifferent pulse. A supply cart rattled past in the hood sound from another universe, utterly separate from the intelligence being passed in this room. "You're telling me this in here, right now?" I'm telling you because I don't know when some ranking officer I'm meant to trust is going to come through that door for my official debrief, he said, staring at her. And because you're the only asset in this facility who I know for a fact is not on any active duty roster. The mission he was giving her felt like a physical object. She looked at him, at the machine, at the tubes keeping him alive, and she understood. She thought of the safe, quiet life she had engineered for herself. She could feel it cracking now, like the ground before a tectonic shift. "Who knows you're here?" she demanded. "Medics? The command post? And whoever the post reports to, which could be the name on your list? And on mine?" he thought back. She stood up, a single, fluid motion born of a decision already made. "You need to recover," she commanded. "Your pressure must come up, your O2 sats must rise, and your tissue must knit. None of that is possible while you're redlining. So you will be quiet and close your eyes." "Lena, that's an order," she said, her tone the same she used in the trauma bay. "You activated me. I'm here. But I can't function if you're working against my directives. Now lie still and let your body do its work." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, with the slow agony of a man fighting his own body, he relaxed. "You always had more command presence than you let on," he muttered. "Rest," she repeated. He complied. She waited until his breathing evened out, about 3 minutes. Then she left the room, her walk controlled and unreadable, her professional mask firmly in place. At the nurses' station, Gloria was handing off to the day shift charge. Daniel, a man whose steady calm came from 20 years in this war zone. He saw Lena emerge from room 1. "You look like you need caffeine. I need a terminal that's off-net," she said. Daniel stopped. "We have terminals. A closed system," she specified, one firewalled from the main hospital network. He studied her for a second. "Admin keeps one in the third-floor annex for sensitive records. That requires approval from Reynolds." "I'll get it," she said. She walked down the stairs, finding Reynolds in his office at 6:49 a.m. This meant he'd either been here all night or arrived before sunrise. Both were standard operating procedure for the man who ran Metro Health's trauma division. He was at his desk with coffee and a wall of charts. He looked up as she knocked, his expression showing he expected a hard conversation, just not quite this early. "Foster," he said. "I need access to the annex terminal on the 3rd floor," she stated. He set his coffee down. "That terminal is for classified patient files." "I'm aware," she replied. "It requires my personal override." "I know that, too." He studied her. The morning light was clinical, finding the silver in his hair and the lines carved by impossible decisions. He was exactly what he looked like. A man of 3 decades in rooms where destinies were brokered, with a razor-sharp sense of the real stakes. "Is this about Harris?" he asked. "It's about patient security," she deflected. "That's not an answer." "Doctor." "Reynolds." She held his gaze. "I need access. I can't elaborate. And you're smart enough to know why. I'm calling on the trust I earned yesterday." Silence filled the office. Reynolds raised his mug, then set it down, untouched. He clicked his pen twice. For a man like him, these were loud negotiations. He unlocked a drawer, slid a key card across the desk. She took it. "Whatever you're doing," he murmured, "you are one of my nurses. If this puts my people in harm's way, you tell me first." "Understood," she said. In the server room, it took her 6 minutes. She wasn't a cyber operator, but her training taught her to trace the contours of data without touching it, to read its shape in the dark. At 6:58 a.m., that shape told a damning story. Jack's convoy was a black op rotation, its logistics locked behind command-level firewalls. The route was finalized 72 hours before, passed through 7 distinct hands. 7 nodes held the full intel packet. The ambush was too perfect. The leak came from someone with the master file. She brought up the distribution list. The name was there. For half a minute, she was still. Then she wiped her signature clean. She pocketed the card and returned to the 3rd floor, to the window where Reynolds had grilled her about Jack Harris. Her fingers touched the cool glass, a mirror of last night, forcing a steady breath. The name on that list wasn't some lieutenant. This wasn't a problem you could quietly disappear. It was a name that made powerful men weigh every word. And its owner knew Jack Harris was alive, which meant he knew exactly where he was. She pulled her phone, stared, then put it back, only to take it out again. Her contacts were for Lena Foster, the nurse. That Lena didn't have the numbers she needed. She burned that life 30 months ago. She gave the ghost 15 seconds, then killed it. She catalogued her current assets. The hospital, the doctor's trust, a secure ICU with one way in, run by a charged nurse with the instincts of a combat medic, who knew every way a military hospital could become a battlefield. She had Jack, breathing. She had herself. It had been enough before. She pushed off the glass and walked back toward the SICU. At 7:14, Marcus arrived, finding Lena at the wrong station, devouring Jack's chart with a focus that repelled all approach. He came to her side. "Roster has you in the ER. My place is here this morning," she said, not looking up. "The ER is getting slammed, Marcus." Her eyes met his, her words chosen not for comfort, but for effect. "You knew something was wrong yesterday. You felt it before the bird even landed. You know I'm not just some new hire." He said nothing. "I am not asking for the whole story," she said. "I am asking you to act on what you've already seen. Whatever is going on, I am why that man is alive, and I have to stay with him." Marcus looked from the chart to her, then to the glass of room 1. Jack was a statue inside, his vitals a cold, digital truth on the screens above. "I'll cover your ER shift until 1200, Marcus said. "Then I need answers." "By noon," Lena vowed, "you'll have them." He gave her one last hard look and left for the elevator. It was 7:22. Lena sat and began writing flawless nursing notes, the perfect cover. While her hands worked, her mind was a battlefield, replaying the name. She sketched the threat's architecture, knowing the fate of those who report rot when the rot is the system itself. At 7:31, the SICU doors opened. Daniel, post-handover, walked out. He stopped at her station. "Ward's quiet," he said. "Harris in 1 needs watching. BP's better, but labs at 800, chest X-ray before 9. I'm on it." "Are you sure you should be up here?" "I'm on it," she repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. He nodded once and left. The unit's rhythm returned. Lena moved with purpose, checking her other patients, briefing the resident at 7:45, then drawing Jack's blood. "Did you find it?" he asked as she prepped the vials. She kept moving. "Not your problem right now." "So that's a yes," he pushed. "It's a not yet," she corrected. He watched her work. How bad? She sealed the last tube and finally met his eyes. Contained, he knew the code. A ghost of a smirk appeared. "Using my own lexicon against me, I learned from the best," she said, picking up the tray. "Rest. I mean it." She moved to the door but stopped, her back to him. "Jack, good to see you're not dead." A moment passed. His voice, when it came, was rough with forced nonchalance. "Yeah, you too." She was gone. At 8:47, Priya's call from the lobby was a silent alarm Lena heard loud and clear. "There's a man at the front desk," Priya said. "Claims to be from Harris's command. He's asking for the attending physician." Lena's hand clenched the phone. "Rank?" she demanded. He didn't state one, Priya said, her voice tightening. Just showed his credentials and wanted the doctor's name. Get Dr. Reynolds, Lena commanded. Now, do not send him up. Right, is every tell Reynolds, Lena interrupted and ended the call. She saw Jack through the glass. He was awake. His gaze was fixed on the ceiling tiles, his body rigid. She could see the tension coiling in him, a soldier's instinct for a change in the atmosphere, a threat vector not yet seen but felt. His eyes found hers. She held up a flat hand, the universal sign 4 times, stand by asterisk. He held her gaze, giving a barely perceptible nod. Lena dialed Reynolds and delivered 6 words in a dead flat tone. Do not let him come up here. Reynolds, to her profound relief, asked nothing. He didn't question, didn't pull rank, ignoring the gulf between a department head and a new nurse. He simply asked, How much time do you need? She replied, 20 minutes. You have 15, he stated, and hung up. She was already moving, entering the room. Jack's eyes tracked her, his mind sharp, alert, and tactical. Command's downstairs, she stated. I heard. No rank offered, she continued. Just ID. Asked for you and your doctor. His jaw hardened. Name? Priya didn't get one. She moved closer, her voice a low murmur. I need you to focus. The route manifest for your convoy had 7 names. I knew 4 of them, he replied. The other 3 were above my pay grade. The name at the top of the chain, she said, was Colonel Richard Voss. A look she'd never witnessed before claimed his face. She had seen him operate under fire, had seen his fury and his fear. In all their years, through everything, she had never seen the man lose his colour. He was bone white. Say the name again, he commanded. Voss, she said. His signature is on the whole package. Route, timeline, personnel. Jack's eyes shut. When they opened, they were like still water over a chasm. Voss has been my commanding officer for 14 months, he said softly. I'm aware. He was in the room when we planned the route. I know, she confirmed. He stared at the ceiling, his hand crushing the bed rail with a power that defied his wounds. 3 of my men, he finished, speaking to the ceiling. Danny Reyes, Chris Okafor, Mark Tillman. The names were a benediction. 22 years between them. Danny's little girl just turned 4. The metal groaned in his grip. Voss shook my hand at their service. His gaze locked onto mine. The air grew thick. I need confirmation. Is the man downstairs, Voss? Jack's head rose from the pillow. If it's him, this isn't a wellness check. No, she confirmed, but he can't make a move in here. He won't, she countered. He's just here to verify the target. The hit will be somewhere else. Jack's gaze went distant, his mind running a Marine's combat calculus prioritizing threats. She recognized that cold logic as her own, a mirror she couldn't afford to look into. Can you get his name? He pressed. Reynolds bought me 15 minutes. We have 12 left. Move! He ordered. And she was gone. From the nurse's hub, she patched through to Priya. The man at reception, she murmured. Get his identification, but be subtle. A beat of silence passed. Then Priya's voice returned, feigning casualness, a clear sign she understood the danger. His credentials are on his left lapel. I have a visual. Stand by. After 9 seconds, Priya reported back. Voss. Colonel Richard J. Voss. Lena, he's not alone. A civilian. Low-key. Lena's hand tightened into a fist. Is Reynolds with him? Reynolds is engaging the colonel now. Buying you time. Good. The colonel's losing patience. I just need 1 more minute, Lena pressed. Cause a minor, believable disruption. A pause. I can arrange that. Good. My thanks, Lena said, and cut the connection. She had 11 minutes. She consumed 8 of them in a sequence of deliberate moves. In the storeroom, she acquired what she required. It was far from a weapon. She hadn't been armed in 2.5 years, but this tool was better than nothing. Returning to the desk, she pulled Jack's file and started charting, methodically recording his 8 o'clock vitals to project an image of routine calm. She registered the elevator's arrival, but kept her gaze fixed downward. The doors slid open. The sound of 2 pairs of shoes approached. Then a voice unfamiliar in person, yet it resonated with the effortless command of a man used to being obeyed. It was the voice she'd anticipated from her intel. "I'm here for Sergeant Harris in room 1, Voss declared. "I am his CO." Lena glanced up. He was in his mid-50s, with a face built for official portraits. His service uniform was a calculated power play, meant to seize control of the environment. The younger man flanking him wore a dark coat, his flat, observant gaze marking him as a professional handler. Reynolds followed a step behind them. Lena placed her pen down. "Colonel Voss," she acknowledged, "I'm Lena Foster, the nurse managing Sergeant Harris's recovery." Voss sized her up with a quick, dismissive look. "I need access to my soldier," he stated. "I understand that," she responded. "The sergeant is 18 hours post-op from extensive surgery. His status is stable but fragile. I must consult the surgical staff before permitting any visit that might induce physiological distress." Voss's expression was stone, but something shifted behind his eyes. "My presence won't cause him stress. I am here to see him." "Understood, sir," Lena said. Her tone was perfectly sterile, professional to the point of being invisible. Standard procedure for any post-surgical patient in his condition requires clearance from the attending physician for any non-essential personnel. Dr. Reynolds can confirm. She looked toward Reynolds, who, to his credit, responded instantly. "That is our protocol for all sicu thoracotomy cases," he affirmed. "I need to perform a quick assessment before authorizing visitors." Voss locked his eyes on Reynolds, a protracted, challenging stare intended to break him. "My security clearance supersedes your hospital regulations." "That may be so, Colonel," Reynolds replied, his voice solid rock. It was the unyielding tone of a man who'd made the final call in life-or-death situations for 3 decades. "But this is my intensive care unit. He is my patient. And the only clearance that matters here is medical." He met Voss's glare. "The evaluation will take approximately 10 minutes. You are welcome to wait." It was 9:41 a.m. Voss waited. He stood near the SICU doors, hands clasped behind his back, his expression a blank wall. The younger man in the dark jacket stood slightly behind him, staring into space. Lena compelled herself to chart at the station, averting her eyes. Inside room 1, Reynolds was conducting his exam. Lena knew he was also talking to Jack. She couldn't predict what Reynolds was asking, or what Jack might say. She only knew Reynolds was no one's fool. The past 22 hours, her ER actions, her system access, the 8:47 call, and now this colonel were enough for a man like him. He could connect the dots. She was betting her life he'd interpret the pattern correctly. The dependence was a deeply unsettling sensation. At 9:49, Reynolds emerged from room 1. He approached the station, grabbed another patient's file, and made a note without looking at Lena. "He is not cleared for visitors," he stated, his volume just enough for Voss to overhear. "His pressure is spiking, and I need to monitor him for an hour before introducing new stimuli." Voss advanced on him. "Doctor, I must insist." Reynolds finally looked up from the chart. His face had become a closed vault. "I understand your position and respect your concern, but Sergeant Harris is now my responsibility, and my medical judgment is not subject to debate or the chain of command." He set the chart down. 1 hour. If his vitals stabilize, a brief visit will be approved. The family waiting room is available down the hall. The silence hung in the air for 4 heavy seconds. "Where is this room?" Voss demanded. Lena stood. "I can show you," she offered, guiding him down the corridor. The younger man followed. The trio proceeded in a rigid, sterile formation. Lena pushed open the consultation room door and held it. "Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water?" "No," Voss snapped. He stepped inside, his shadow behind him. Lena let the door swing shut and returned with a steady gait. Reynolds was at the nurse's desk, his back to them, his voice a near silent whisper. He was asking about Harris's cognitive state, specifically if he was lucid enough to give a statement. "That's what I was afraid of," she breathed. "The man with him made a call as you led them away." "A 30-second call," Reynolds clarified. A cold dread tightened in Lena's stomach. 30 seconds is more than enough. "For what?" Reynolds questioned. She met his gaze. She was committing to a path, just as she had at 23 when she first understood her choices had immense consequences. "The intel I'm about to give you," she began, her voice low, "will change your reality. You can't unknow it, and possessing this knowledge will endanger your career." She held his stare. "I'm offering you an exit. I can see this through on my own." Reynolds weighed her for a long second. "Brief me," he finally commanded. She laid out the framework, the convoy ambush, the intelligence breach, the kill list, the name on it, and the asset 40 feet below, sent not to comfort, but to assess if a soldier had become a threat requiring removal. Reynolds listened, his expression a perfect mask to any casual observer. But she saw it all. The rapid processing, the instinctual disbelief at the truth's sheer weight, the moment of grim acceptance, and then the cold resolve she recognized from her own reflection. When she finished, he was quiet. "We have to move, Harris," Reynolds said flatly. "I know. Not to another floor. Out of this building." "I know," she affirmed. "I have transfer authority to Fort Belvoir," he stated. "It's 40 minutes from here. I can justify the move on medical grounds. His thoracic trauma is legitimate, and have him on the road in under an hour." Lena stared, blindsided. She had anticipated assistance, not this. He wasn't just offering a hand, he was stepping into the inferno beside her, prepared to take on the full weight of the consequences. "Are you aware of what you are doing?" she asked. "I am transferring a patient to a specialized facility," Reynolds countered. "It is my duty." "Reynolds," she started. "It is my duty," he repeated, his voice absolute. "This transfer will be completely legitimate because the medical need is real. I need 30 minutes from you to handle the logistics and a way to keep that colonel occupied until the ambulance is here." "You'll have your 30 minutes," she promised. Her thoughts raced, calculating risks. The aid, the phone call, the potential response time, and the narrowing window she had left. She took stock of her assets. The hospital, its labyrinthine corridors, and the one weapon she held that no one else did, the truth. A carefully aimed fragment of it would pin a man like Voss more effectively than any physical barrier. She walked back toward the consultation room. She knocked once, then entered without waiting. Voss looked up from his seat by the window. The aide, who had been on his phone against the wall, immediately straightened, the device disappearing into his coat. "I owe you an apology," Lena began. Voss's demeanour shifted. It wasn't warmth. She doubted he was capable of it. It was a tactical adjustment to a new piece on the board. "For what?" he inquired. "For the delay," she answered, pointedly taking the opposite chair without being invited. She placed her hands in her lap, her expression a study in professional concern. "The reality is, Sergeant Harris asked me to delay you." Voss went perfectly still. "He is conscious," she went on. "Has been since about 6 a.m." He's coherent, but when I told him you had arrived, he—" She paused, feigning a search for the right words. "He asked for a moment. He told me he wasn't ready." She locked her eyes on Voss. "I am not privy to what happened over there, Colonel, but it's weighing on him. He knew 3 of the men who were lost." A shadow passed over Voss's face. It was suppressed in an instant, but she saw it. She saw it all. "He is a soldier," Voss stated, his voice toneless. "He is," she conceded. "And soldiers often find it difficult to admit they are struggling, seeing it as a weakness they can't afford." She let the silence hang. "Give him a few more minutes. I will take you to him myself." Voss studied her, his scrutiny intensified. She felt his eyes on her, a palpable pressure. "Your investment in this man is significant," he observed. "I'm good at my job," she replied flatly. "Your first week?" he noted. It was an accusation. She met it head on. "Yes." "And you're personally overseeing a SEAL's recovery. I was his lead nurse in the OR yesterday." "He has faith in me," she said, "which is an advantage." A long, assessing look. Voss finally leaned back. "You have 15 minutes," he granted. "Thank you," she said, standing. "I'll return when he is ready." She left the room. In the hall her steps were deliberate, her face a blank slate, but the moment she turned the corner she ran. She went directly to room 1. Reynolds was inside, tablet in hand at the bed's foot, speaking to Jack in a low, rapid voice. Jack's eyes locked onto Lena's the instant she entered. "How long?" 15 minutes before he gets nervous," she said. "Reynolds is arranging the move." "Fort Belvoir," Reynolds cut in. "I have a thoracic man there. The orders are being processed now." He looked at Jack. "Can you handle a 40-minute ambulance ride?" Jack glanced at Lena. "His vitals are holding." She verified the chest tube sights were solid. "If we secure the drain and keep him flat, the risk is manageable." "Define manageable," Jack challenged. "It beats staying here," she replied. His eyes met hers. "Then do it." Reynolds hypered with a controlled urgency. Lena began the preparations, checking the drain, securing his IVs for the 40-minute transport. "That man with Voss," Jack said as she moved. "Young, wearing a dark jacket." "He's not military," Jack said. "Not active. His posture is off, but he's trained." How he claimed that wall, watched the exit. He paused. "He's a contractor, so Voss is using an off-the-books asset." Lena absorbed this information without pausing. "So Voss is operating outside channels." "Which means he's scared," Jack said. "Men like him only go private when they're spooked." His voice turned to steel. "He knows that I know." "He doesn't know how much," Lena said. "He'll assume the worst," Jack countered. "Which happens to be the truth. 10:23. 11 minutes gone." The door opened and Marcus entered. He saw Lena's work, the clear setup for a patient transport, and his face shifted from confusion to a silent question. "Marcus, I need your help," Lena said. "I figured," he responded. "Go to the consult room and tell the colonel Dr. Reynolds needs him on 2 to review intake forms. Standard patient protocol. It's a complete lie. Buy me another 6 minutes." Marcus's gaze went from her to Jack, then back to her. "I told you I'd have an answer by noon," she reminded him. "It's 10:23, he stated. "I know," she said. A brief silence stretched between them. Then Marcus squared up, adjusted his ID, and walked out like a man delivering a routine message. It was a flawless deception. Lena let out a quiet breath and returned to her task. "You trust him," Jack noted. "I trust what I see," she corrected. "And that's enough. 10:31. Reynolds appeared at the window, holding up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. Lena turned to Jack. "When transport arrives, let them work. Don't you sit up. Don't fight them." Don't pull any line they connect. I can be compliant, he retorted. You're incapable of it, she said. His mouth twitched into what was almost a smile, there and gone, sparking something inside her she chose to ignore. Lena. He said her name as he did at 9:47 last night, testing its feel. What is the mission after Fort Belvoir? One thing at a time, she hedged. That's not a mission. It is the only option right now, she replied. Securing the last line, she stood back, watching him, the machines, the chest that was still breathing when it shouldn't have been. After Fort Belvoir, you get better, and then we figure out the rest. Together. He said it like a fact. She looked at him. She thought of the quiet she'd made for herself. The controlled life, defined by a nurse's badge, a locker, and a shift that started at 7. She thought of the 2.5 years she spent building something small enough to be safe. She recalled the name on that list. She recalled Danny Reyes and his daughter, who would turn 4 in October. Yes, she said. Together. 10:37. The transport team arrived, and the room filled with purpose. They moved Jack Harris with care, handling their cargo like it was priceless. Down the hall, Marcus was distracting a colonel with fake paperwork. Lena walked beside the gurney toward the service elevator, her hand near his, not touching, but close. The way you stay near someone you are not willing to lose. The elevator doors slid open. She went in. The car descended, a machine ignorant of its passengers. Lena stood by the gurney, hand on its rail, her eyes glued to the monitors the team had mounted. She watched his vitals, as she had from the moment he rolled in. The numbers were not the whole story, but they were the start, and the start was always the most vital part. Blood pressure 96/62, heart rate 71, oxygen at 93, and holding. He was watching the elevator ceiling, but not idly. His eyes had the same tactical awareness they'd held all morning. The look of a man processing a live scenario, who wouldn't rest until it was solved. But underneath it, she recognized a quieter feeling she knew from her own escape. It was the distinct relief of moving out of immediate harm, and the heavy fatigue that floods in when the threat recedes. Your pressure is up 2 points, she said. I feel it, he replied. Good? Good, he said. It feels like I'm still here. The elevator opened to the ground-level service corridor. The team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 medics, a tech, all professionals with no drama. Lena stayed at Jack's left. The hall ran to the ambulance bay, and she unconsciously timed the distance 42 seconds to the doors. Then the doors opened, and morning air flooded in. Jack Harris crossed the line from the sterile hospital to the world outside. Lena felt the change in him, a palpable shift in the air. Cold, he said. It's March, she answered. I'm aware of the calendar, he shot back. Then don't complain about it, she said. The corner of his mouth ticked upward. Yes, ma'am. They loaded him in, and she climbed in after. The lead paramedic, a thick-set man named Torres with old tattoos, looked from her badge to her face, deciding if he should argue. Are you family? Torres asked. I'm his nurse, she replied. This transport doesn't have a nurse rider. It does now, she stated. Torres met her stare for a second, then shrugged. A man who chose his battles. He slammed the heavy door shut. 10:44 a.m. The ambulance pulled away from the hospital. Upstairs, Marcus was running out of his fabricated delay tactics. He knew his time was up just as Voss stood, his voice tight with a patience that had just run out. You have stalled quite enough. Marcus held his stare. Colonel, I want a status update. Now, Voss said, a command disguised as a question. He already knew something was wrong. This was the last formality before he brought the place down. Marcus was silent. Voss burst from the office, his contractor right behind him, already on his phone. He made a straight line for the SICU, pushing into room 1. Through the window he saw it. A stripped bed, blank monitors, tubes coiled on the floor. He stared for 4 long seconds. He turned to the nurse's station. A day shift nurse looked back, eyes wide with terror. "The patient in 1, where is he?" Voss demanded. "Transported," she stammered. "Left about 15 minutes ago." "Where to?" Voss pressed. "All the necessary information is in the report," Reynolds said, appearing at the SICU entrance. Dressed to leave, tablet in hand, he radiated absolute command, pinning Voss with that same hard stare from earlier. He stood there, the weight of 30 years of medical authority in his bearing. "Fort Belvoir," Reynolds said, "for a thoracic specialist, fully documented and medically required." He held out the tablet. "Here are the orders." Voss's rage cooled into something far more lethal. Voss locked eyes with Reynolds, then shot a look at his aide. A subtle shake of the head confirmed it. The transport had vanished. "This is far from over," Voss declared, a challenge aimed at the world itself. Reynolds remained stoic. Voss turned and left, his subordinate in tow. As the elevator doors sealed them away, the SICU seemed to breathe again. Reynolds then moved to the nurse's station and keyed in a secure number. The line picked up after 3 rings. "Dr. James Reynolds, Metro Health," he announced. "Get me the DOD Inspector General. I possess evidence of a potential intelligence breach and am filing my report." A beat of silence followed. "Yes, I will hold." As he waited, 40 miles down the highway, Lena's phone vibrated. It was a reply from a number she'd contacted at 7:15 that morning. A deep cover contact, Carol Sims, unused for 2.5 years. The text read, "Acknowledged. Action underway. Secure the asset." Lena glanced at it and put the phone away. "Good news?" Jack asked her. "Yes," she said. "The gears are turning. Whose?" "Someone outside Voss's influence," she replied. They were just waiting for the signal. "That report you filed," she started. "Where did it go?" "Directly to the IG." "I bypassed the chain," he confessed. "Just a gut feeling." "A very good one," she affirmed. "Your report started it. The data I pulled cements the entire case. It's solid." "For what?" he inquired. "To make Voss's actions undeniable," she said. "His patrons can't cover this up. 2 independent, verified sources are telling the exact same story." Jack was quiet, watching the road flash by. In the front, Torres drove as the technician adjusted the O2 levels, a professional fading into the wallpaper. "Danny Reyes," Jack said softly. "Chris Okafor. Mark Tillman." "I know," Lena confirmed. "This is for them," he stated. "Not for the brass, not for the record. For them." "I know," she repeated gently. He looked up, his hand on the sheet. She rested hers nearby, a silent presence. It was the same support she offered in the SICU presence without pressure. He took her hand. She held it. 11:22. Fort Belvoir. The medical facility received them with practiced military efficiency, everything prepared in advance. Reynolds' associate, Dr. Annan, a thoracic specialist, was waiting. He had the calm aura of an expert. He took charge of Jack's care with a quiet authority that immediately earned Lena's trust. She stepped back, giving him room. She stayed on the periphery, a sentinel observing the data transfer to the new equipment, ensuring a clean handoff. Annan met her gaze across the room. "You were the one who diagnosed the tension pneumo?" "Yes," she confirmed. Annan reviewed the scans sent over earlier. "Perfect call," he noted. "Another 20 minutes and he would have been a casualty." "I'm aware," she said. "Are you staying?" he asked. She looked at Jack, now enduring the team's work with quiet resignation. For a while. At 12:17 her phone rang in the hallway. Not Carol Sims, the number was private, a burner call. It was a familiar protocol from her old life. She paused, took a deep breath, and answered. "Foster," she said. "Miss." "Foster," a crisp female voice responded, the kind used for secured communications. "Who I am is unimportant. Your intelligence, combined with Sergeant Harris's report, was actioned at 11:45 hours today." "How fast is the response?" Lena inquired. "Immediate," the voice said. "The subject is on administrative hold. He will be notified in 20 minutes. His external contact has also been flagged." Lena let out a slow breath. "He'll get lawyers." "He will," the woman confirmed. "The best. But our case is ironclad." A short pause. "Miss Foster, we are aware of your background. Your current identity is not compromised. And that means—" Lena pushed. "It means Nurse Lena Foster continues her life as normal. Your previous file stays sealed. Today's contribution, however, has been noted." Another silence. "We are grateful you acted." The line went dead. Lena stood still for a moment before pocketing the phone and returning to the room. Jack's gaze met hers. Anand's team had left. He was alone, connected to new machines displaying the same vital signs. He had the same vulnerable expression as before, the transparency that comes after staring death in the face. "Well?" he prompted. "It's done," she said. And it was fast. His eyes questioned her for more. "Voss was suspended this morning. A full-blown investigation is active." Something profound settled over Jack Harris's features, an emotion heavier than relief. It was the solemn feeling of vindication for a man who needed his sacrifice to have meaning. The names he spoke, Danny, Chris, Mark, wouldn't be buried in redacted files or forgotten truths. There would be a reckoning. His jaw set, his lips pressed into a hard line as he gripped the bed rail. A full minute passed. "Okay," he finally exhaled, the word carrying a universe of unsaid feelings. "Okay," she repeated, pulling a chair to his bedside. The steady pulse of the monitors was the only sound. The room had the particular silence of a storm that has passed, leaving the long work of recovery ahead. "And you?" Jack asked. "What's next for you?" She thought of Metro Health, the ER's controlled chaos, Marcus's steady presence, Priya's quiet support, and Reynolds, who trusted her with a keycard before making a career-defining call. "I go back," she said. "That's it? Just back?" "Not just," she replied, "but yes." He studied her with his clear grey eyes, once the colour of a stormy sea. "And what happens to Harris?" he asked. "Harris gets better." She said it with certainty. "Dr. Anand is the best, and Harris is the toughest man I've ever met. He made it through yesterday. He'll make it through anything." She looked at him. "Then he'll figure out what's next, like everyone else." But what if his next includes the woman known as Foster? The question was delivered flatly, without drama, but it landed with incredible weight. He was a man who hated ambiguity. She met his stare, thinking of the quiet life she'd constructed. She recalled him whispering her old call sign when he was barely conscious. She remembered saying his name back. "That's a conversation for when you're not tethered to medical equipment and running on donated blood," she deflected. "That wasn't a no," he pointed out. "No," she admitted softly, "it wasn't." The corner of his mouth lifted in a faint smile. She looked away. At 1:48 p.m. her phone buzzed. Rinse. She took the call outside. "I spoke with the IG's office," Reynolds said, his tone naturally composed. "They have my report. A formal investigation has commenced." "I heard," she said. "A contact informed me 20 minutes ago. It's happening." A moment passed. "You have contacts." "Had," she corrected. "A few are apparently still operational." "Lena," he began, the sound of her name holding a new weight. It carried the gravity of a man who'd made a choice and was now facing its repercussions. Should I be worried for my team after what happened? No. Her voice was absolute. The situation was isolated to Harris. It came to Metro Health with him. It didn't start there, it dies here, but it follows you, he observed. She considered it. Until the investigation is complete. Then it dies for me, too. A longer pause. Priya wondered if you were some kind of government agent, Reynolds mentioned. A small laugh nearly escaped her. And what did you tell her? That you are a phenomenal nurse, he said. Which you are. No, she agreed. That part is true. We could use you back, he said. The ER is swamped. Tomorrow morning, she promised. 7 a.m., he stated. 7 a.m., she echoed. After ending the call, she leaned on the wall, her eyes shut. The hospital's constant hum surrounded her, a system moving with its own purpose, oblivious to the human dramas within it. She gave herself one moment to absorb the last 26 hours. The radio static, the man on the stretcher, the hiss of a needle as a life was pulled back from the edge, a name whispered in the night, a hand in hers, a key card, a call, and Marcus bracing for a fight. 3 names, ghosts spoken to the ceiling, while his hand warped the steel rail. She let the echoes fade. Pushing from the wall, she re-entered. He was under a shallow peace claimed by a body that had finally defeated his frantic mind. His breathing was level, his right hand open on the blanket, the burned scar stark in the lamplight. She stood at the foot of his bed, her eyes tracing the steady, digital lines of his life. His chest rose and fell with the unyielding will of a body that would not break. Reynolds was correct. She was a skilled nurse. She was also something far older, a honed instrument she had tried to put away, forged by years of surviving hostile territory. Yesterday had not been her mission. She had not pursued this. Arriving at Metro Health Military Hospital 6 minutes early, she had sought only quiet work. The universe, as usual, had other ideas. She had ceased being surprised by this. She was through apologizing for what she was forged to be. She moved the chair closer and took her post. She was there at 3 a.m, and again at 4. When Jack woke at 4:22 and saw her watching, she simply met his gaze. His stare held hers, the room's mechanical hum wrapping around them as the afternoon bled away. At 5:17, a text from her Arlington contact buzzed. 2 words, Voss detained. She put the phone away and looked at Jack. "It's finished," she said. He did not look away. She saw the words land, sinking like a stone into the deep water where Danny, Chris, and Mark existed. It was the place where the memory of Voss, the convoy map, and the ambush were permanently burned. She watched his throat work, his jaw clenching as he took the full weight of the news. He bore it all, not by lessening the pain, but by standing firm against it. "Okay," he breathed, the word holding everything. "Okay," she confirmed. She reached out, her hand covering his. He did not have to reach back this time. Lena Foster began the day as a new nurse. She was ending it as something unnameable, ancient, and more whole than she had been before. She was a woman who understood there was no choice to be made between the life she now lived and the one she'd left behind. The healer was real. The shadow was real. Both served the same core function, to stand between the innocent and the things that would do them harm. She'd done it yesterday with a syringe and 2 quiet words. She would do it again tomorrow, and she would be at Metro Health at 700 hours, on time, because that was the sum of her now. All of her, at once, without regret. The assignment, in all its iterations, was never complete. It only changed its theatre, and Lena Foster had never been afraid of the terrain.